They say The Exorcist is just a movie. But what if I told you it was born from something that actually happened? Not a legend, not a rumor, but a real case of possession that tore through a small American town long before Hollywood turned it into nightmare fuel. Our story begins in 1949, in a quiet suburb just outside Washington, D.C., where a 13-year-old boy, his true name hidden behind pseudonyms like Roland Doe and Robbie Mannheim, became the center of one of the most terrifying cases in modern religious history. The priest who would later meet him swore they had looked into the eyes of something not human. It began with noises, soft scratching behind the walls. At first his family thought it was rats, but the sounds grew louder, sharper, moving from ceiling to floor, following the boy wherever he went. Then furniture began to slide across the room, chairs toppled. The bed shook violently as he tried to sleep. One night, a framed picture of Christ fell and shattered into jagged shards. His mother, terrified, began to pray, and for a moment the house fell silent. But only for a moment. The family was Lutheran, not Catholic. They didn't believe in possession, at least not in the way Catholics did. But science failed them. Doctors ran tests and found nothing. The boy's body was healthy, yet his behavior grew more erratic. He would enter trances, his voice changing pitch, muttering in Latin words he could not possibly know. His skin broke into scratches that seemed to appear as they watched, words etched across his flesh as if written by invisible claws. Desperate, the family reached out to their local minister, Reverend Luther Miles Schulze, who agreed to help. He invited the boy to spend the night at his home, to observe these so-called disturbances for himself. That night, Reverend Schulze watched as the boy lay quietly on a cot in the guest room. For hours, all was still. Then, without warning, the mattress began to tremble. Objects moved across the floor. The minister prayed aloud, but the boy began to grunt and curse, the words spilling out like bile. Schulze fled the room and the next morning told the boy's parents to contact the Catholic Church. Whatever this was, he said, it was beyond his understanding. The priests of St. James Church listened to the family's plea. Among them was Father Edward Hughes, a mild, soft-spoken man who had no experience with exorcisms. He agreed to meet the boy in a small room at Georgetown University Hospital, under supervision. The doctors thought it was psychiatric. Father Hughes wasn't so sure. As he sprinkled holy water, the boy's demeanor shifted instantly. His lips twisted into a grin, and he screamed in a voice that didn't sound like his own. Then the bed shook. A metal spring snapped free, slicing Father Hughes's arm. The bleeding priest stumbled back, calling out prayers as the boy laughed, a deep guttural sound that echoed down the hall. The doctors sedated him, but even under heavy medication, the boy's body convulsed violently, as if resisting the drugs themselves. That night, the hospital discharged him. No one wanted him there anymore. The family moved the boy to St. Louis, where relatives lived. They hoped a change of scenery would bring peace. It didn't. The scratching started again. Objects levitated. The boy's eyes rolled back, and his voice became a chorus of growls. One night, his aunt saw a word appear on his chest, red and raised like a burn. Louis. To her it was a sign. They needed to go to St. Louis, to seek help from the priests there. That decision would set off one of the most intense exorcisms in American history. Father William Bodern, a Jesuit priest known for his discipline and faith, was assigned to investigate. He was joined by Father Walter Halloran, a younger priest with a soldier's steadiness, and Father Raymond Bishop, who documented everything in a journal that would later become the backbone for William Peter Blatty's The Exorcist. What they described defied reason. The boy's body reacted violently to holy water, even when it was secretly replaced with regular tap water, as if he could sense the difference. Crucifixes were ripped from the wall. Latin phrases appeared carved into his skin. When the priests prayed, the boy howled obscenities in voices that seemed to come from multiple throats. The air grew heavy, and witnesses swore they could feel a pressure, as if the room itself were holding its breath. At times Roland seemed normal, quiet, polite, even apologetic for his behavior. But then, without warning, His eyes would darken, his voice would drop, and something else would speak through him. It mocked the priests, calling them by name, repeating their sins back to them. One night it whispered, "I will not leave. He is mine." The sessions grew longer, the violence more intense. The boy's body thrashed so violently that several men had to hold him down. Halloran later wrote that the temperature in the room would plummet suddenly, frost forming on the windows even in spring. The priests began to fear for their own lives, yet none of them would quit. If you're still listening, you might be feeling a chill right now. Go ahead, pause the video for a second. Take a breath. Then make sure you're subscribed, because the next part of this story is where things turn truly nightmarish. What happened inside that small St. Louis bedroom has never been fully explained. And by the time it ended, everyone who was there would carry scars, both seen and unseen. Because when you fight something that calls itself a demon, you never walk away unchanged. And the priests were about to learn that the hard way. The exorcism began in March of 1949, inside a modest home in St. Louis. The boy lay strapped to a bed, trembling, while 3 priests stood around him with holy water and crucifixes. They had prepared for weeks, fasting, praying, steeling themselves for whatever would come. But nothing could have prepared them for what they were about to see. As Father Bodern began the ancient Latin rite, the boy's body arched backward, his eyes rolling white. A guttural scream tore through the room, so loud that neighbors later claimed to have heard it from the street. The priests continued, sweat dripping from their faces as the boy's skin writhed beneath his shirt, the fabric tearing as fresh welts appeared. Each word of the prayer seemed to provoke a violent reaction, as if the thing inside him were fighting to stay. At one point, a low voice hissed through his clenched teeth, "I am one of many." The room fell silent. Then, in an instant, the lights exploded. Darkness swallowed them whole. In that blackness, the priests said they heard laughter, deep, resonant, echoing from every corner. When the light returned, the boy was still, eyes closed, a faint smile on his lips. But it wasn't over. Over the following weeks, the priests performed more than 30 exorcism sessions. Sometimes the boy was calm for days, even weeks, before the rage returned. During one session, he broke free from the restraints and attacked Father Halloran, breaking his nose. In another, he vomited streams of bile that reeked of sulfur, and every time after each violent episode, he would collapse in exhaustion, whispering, "It wants to kill me." Neighbors whispered about strange noises coming from the house, groans, shouts, and something like growling. One priest swore he saw the boy's bed levitate off the floor. Another said he felt unseen hands grab his throat. The fear was so heavy it lingered long after they left the room. By early April, the priests were desperate. They decided to move the boy to Alexian Brothers Hospital, where they could continue the ritual under supervision. It was there, in a small room on the 5th floor, that the final confrontation took place. As the priests began the prayers once more, the boy convulsed violently, his voice roaring, "He will never leave." But Father Bodern pressed on, calling upon the name of Saint Michael the Archangel. The boy screamed, his body stiffening, and then, in a voice not his own, shouted, "Michael! Michael! Michael! He must go now." Then, silence. For the first time in weeks, the boy's body went still. When he opened his eyes, his voice was calm. He said he saw a vision, a great light, and a figure dressed in armor standing over a dark shape, sword raised high. The priests wept. The air felt clean again. The exorcism was over. In the days that followed, Roland remembered nothing of what had happened. The strange marks on his body faded. The scratching in the walls stopped. The priests returned to their parishes, each of them changed. Father Bodern would never speak of it again. Father Halloran, when asked years later, said only, "It was real, every bit of it." The church sealed its records, but a diary kept by Father Bishop leaked decades later, inspiring a Georgetown student named William Peter Blatty to write The Exorcist. He took the details, the levitation, the Latin curses, the violent possession, and gave them to a fictional girl named Reagan. The world thought it was just a story. But Blatty knew better. What most people don't realize is that every scene in that film, the shaking bed, the guttural voice, the smell of sulfur, was lifted from those real events in 1949. Even the screams were said to match what the priests described hearing. The movie was cursed, or so they said. Crew members were injured, the set caught fire, and some who worked on it claimed they heard whispers when no one was around. But maybe that's what happens when you retell a story that was never meant to be spoken aloud. The boy, now an old man, has lived his life quietly. He never spoke publicly about what happened, never sought fame or money. Those who've met him describe him as kind, gentle, and devout. But they also say he never sets foot in a church, ever. Perhaps he's afraid of what might still be waiting. If you've made it this far, you know this isn't just a ghost story. It's a reminder. Evil doesn't always announce itself with horns and fire. Sometimes it starts as a whisper in the walls, a shadow in the corner, a dream that feels a little too real. And sometimes all it takes is one invitation for it to step inside. If you felt a chill while listening, maybe hit that like button. Leave a comment. Tell me if you believe it really happened. And subscribe, because there are darker stories still waiting to be told. But remember, the next time you hear something moving in the dark, something that shouldn't be there, don't call its name. It might already know yours.